Ahlan wa sahlan, welcome friends. We're pleased to have you with us. We're going to start on time and hopefully wrap up on time in this, which is the third of a series of 3 events which are being held during Lent and are being co-hosted by Sabeel Australia, by Palestinian Christians in Australia, who are our hosts this evening, and also by the Palestine-Israel Ecumenical Network. And as we go through this series, we've been listening to the voices of Palestinian Christians, and we've been reflecting on the call of Christ upon our own hearts. Special welcome to Jason Damouni from PCIA, who's one of our speakers tonight, and who will be speaking about his experience of being a Palestinian Christian living in Australia, in Perth. So I guess that's just on the edge of being in Australia. Hey, Jason.
Thank you.
We'll also be listening to a pre-recorded interview with Fatin Kunkar, who's also from PCIA, living in Melbourne, not able to be with us in person tonight, but she's pre-recorded her presentation and we'll have that shared with us. A couple of housekeeping tips. Please remember to turn off your mic unless you're actually asking a question at the time. This will mean we won't get the barking dog, the ringing phone, the doorbell, and the other distractions, which can otherwise happen. And it's still worth putting our phones on silent just in case they ring when we're unmuted. As you may have noticed, the event is being recorded. So if you don't wish your face to appear in the video, just leave your camera turned off and we'll just have a rectangle with your name. My name is Greg Jenks and I'm the president of Sabeel Australia, as well as being a member of the executive for the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network. And as of today, I'm an affiliate member of Palestinian Christians in Australia. So I guess that's a reminder that we can all, anyone interested in this meeting could also sign up to be a member or an affiliate member of PCIA. I'm joining this meeting from Yagara country on the south and the west of metropolitan Brisbane. And but in many ways, my Palestinian ID is domiciled in Nazareth, or Nasri, as the locals call it. So as we gather, we acknowledge the first peoples of this ancient land. And I'll invite you to take a moment in the chat room, chat box area, just to introduce yourself and to say which land you're joining us from in terms of Indigenous peoples. And if you have a particular connection with Palestine, you might like to note whether that's an ancestral village for your family or whether it's a place in Palestine which has particular significance for you. And as we gather for this meeting, coming from many different places, we acknowledge the dispossession and displacement of so many First Nations people, whether that be in this land or in the Middle East, and we yearn for justice, reconciliation, and a shared prosperous future together. So I'm now going to hand over to Susan Wahab, who will introduce the first segment from Fatin.
Welcome, everyone. I'm very pleased that we're here, all of us tonight. This is our third presentation that we're doing with Sabeel and PIEN, and we're very excited to share with you the Palestinian Christian perspective tonight, especially the young people. So tonight I'm going to start with Fatin. Fatin Kunkar is a first-generation Palestinian Australian. Her family originated from the town of Beit Jala, which is near Bethlehem. She was born, however, in Melbourne when her parents, you will hear her story, when her parents came to Australia, her mom was pregnant. So Fatin was born in Australia, but conceived in Palestine. She works as an orthoptist, and she is a board director of PCIA. Her passion is to help young Australian Palestinian Christians to connect with their roots and celebrate their identity. And as you listen to her tonight and the candid conversations her and I had, you will realize why she actually joined PCIA and why she wants to share her identity with you once you hear her story. So just bear with me while I get this organized with sharing the screen, and then putting her video. Welcome, Fatin. We've got Fatin here. She's a committee member of Palestinian Christians in Australia, and we're going to talk about your experience of being a Palestinian Christian and living in Australia as well, born in Australia. Let's start talking about you, Fatin. How did your parents end up in Australia?
So my parents came to Melbourne in 1990. There was the Intifada in the town they were living in at the time. It was Bejala. What is Bejala? And I was born here the same year that they arrived. And so growing up, they always instilled the culture in me, always told me I was Palestinian. I had gone to events where I wore the thorb, and I had, I'd have Palestinian dishes at home. I actually didn't know how to speak English until I went to kindergarten. I learned English in kindergarten because they really wanted to instill that in me. And then I always heard about Palestine, but never went. The first time I remember going, I was 8, and for me, it was fun. I met my cousins, I met my grandparents, I met my aunties and uncles. It was just an enjoyable side I had to me until I got a bit older and I started to understand that, as proud of it as I am, it actually makes me very different. And I'm proud of being different, but it was a really shock to the system when I found out that being Palestinian is probably not the most fun thing to be in some areas.
Yes, it is not fun.
That I'd gone to Catholic school growing up, so the Christian part of me was never the issue. And even then, the Palestinian part wasn't either, because I came from where Jesus was born. So I'd always surrounded myself with quite like-minded people. So I never felt that and I still feel up until now, I surround myself with this innocence about Palestine, because Palestine for me is my family. It's not political. It's not where problems happen. Yes, I'm restricted there, but it's still where my family is.
So growing up, you've gone to Palestine, you came back. Did you share your experiences with people about, what Bejala is, how it was for you when you went?
Yeah, so as a child, it was just a holiday for me. That was lots of fun. And then as an adult, because my parents actually gave me the Palestinian ID and now I have a Palestinian passport, I travel like a Palestinian to get to Palestine. So I have to go to Jordan, I have to cross the border, I have to do all the paperwork. It's crazy, it's a nightmare, it's exhausting, but it's my story. And it's like it sounds really bad, but it's like a novelty, but maybe because I'm not doing it all the time. Yes. But it's a novelty I get to share here, and it's my experience of how much Palestinians actually struggle. Because you can hear it on the news, but when it happens to someone, like if I was telling a friend of mine, to them, I'm an Australian. I grew up with them. I don't have an accent. So to know that a fellow Australian struggled because they were looked upon differently is a way to show them that we are treated a little subclass.
So when you cross the border through Jordan, how long does it take you to get there?
It's gotten better over time. When I was a kid, it would take like over 12 hours. I remember at one time they stopped the bus for some unknown reason. Now, I reckon I can make there in like 5 hours on a good day. On a good day. Yeah. Depends on how things go.
Who's manning the borders?
Oh dear, but actually I've been through the VIP. Not that special. Really not that special. And you still have to go through the same process. You just get to sit in an air-conditioned room while you wait instead of on a hot bus.
So when people ask you, well, where do you come from? You know, because you know your looks, I suppose, give it away. When you're in Australia, when people ask you where do you come from, what do you tell them?
Not just my looks, my name, Fatin, is just...
your name, that's correct. Yes.
It depends who asks me, to be honest, and it depends on the tone of voice that they're asking it in, because some people I find can come across really condescending. So when people ask me, you know, what nationality are you? If it sounds like they're going to judge me for it, I will tell them I'm Australian. And then I say, oh, no, I mean, where are your parents from? And then I'll tell them Palestine. And then some people are curious and intrigued, and other people want to talk politics.
So, what, you know, you joined Palestinian Christians in Australia as one of our youngest members. What's your vision for our community, and what do you want to do with the social media that you started?
Well, I'm hoping that because this opportunity came to me and I was a bit doubtful and unsure, and speaking to you helped me understand that my experiences growing up are disjointed but also appreciated by other people, because I really felt a bit alone growing up, and all I had were my cousins that were also Palestinian. We had some family friends, but we lived on the other side of Melbourne, didn't get to see them often. And as we grew up, we lost touch because we always relied on our parents when the parents would go visiting. So if I had more people that understood the disconnect, but also connection that we struggle internally, that would have been amazing. Even I got married a few months ago, and my husband is Palestinian from the same village that my parents are from, born here. I knew his parents, I never knew him, but we can bond over the most not insignificant, but the most minute things because we share the same culture. I never had to explain to him that we couldn't go on holiday together until we got married. I don't have to worry that when we sit.
You can't move in together until you get married.
That when we're in family discussions, I don't have to stop and translate things for him.
That's a bonus.
He understands all the jokes. He understands my upbringing in Australia and primary school and camps and things like that. But he will also understand that this is my favorite place to get falafel from when I go to Palestine. I'm so excited to go back to Palestine with him because it's and the people in Beit Jala were so excited that we were getting married because it's two of us, like one of us has found each other, and I can't wait for him to be able to communicate to my family over there. I don't have to worry about him, and I can do the same, and he won't have to worry about me. So it's this comfort in familiarity as well. So I found it in my husband, but I hope that our young people can find it in each other, this comfort where I know exactly what you're talking about and you don't have to use the words.
Yes, and you don't have to explain
or
translate.
You don't have to say anything.
Yes.
Yeah. Or, you know, knowing that, sorry, I can't eat meat where it's fasting because it's, you know, Easter's coming up, whatever. And knowing that when we do have Easter, you know, the Holy Week, it's 7 days, but there's like 11 liturgies that you can go to. And that's the special side of being Christian as well. We take our faith intensely seriously. And I find even more so because in Australia, we are so proud of the fact that our faith came from where our parents came from.
Where we were born.
Where we were born, that's right. Like, we don't take it for granted.
That's right.
And we represent...
You look around all these people who are Christian anywhere around the world, and you know that they're indebted to us because our ancestors converted them.
Yeah, I feel like we are representing it as well.
Yeah.
And you want to
So
make it proud.
your vision for the social media, what is it going to be?
Well, I'm hoping that we can use it as a platform to join our two cultures together, whether you bring Palestine into Australia and you have, I have headbands that have tatreez on them, the Palestinian tapestry on them. And that's a way I can bring in the most simplest way, or even lunch or dinner, like I have za'atar for lunch and bring it to work, or I share my Palestinian food with my friends at work, or even when I go to their jala, I might bring something Australian with me, whether it's Tim Tams or Vegemite. So it's about joining the two cultures together, sharing that on social media, and making it sense of normality, and also showcasing the talents that our Palestinian Christians do have, and knowing that we can break through stereotypes and be super successful at what we do and not have to hide who we are in the process.
Great to have you on, Fatin.
Thank you, Susan.
Go to Jason.
So for the Bible reading today comes from Matthew 22, 36 to 40. In the name of the Lord, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? Which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to them, you shall love the Lord with your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all law and the prophets. Amen. So back to myself, and thank you all for being with us during this call. I believe that all of us are on a journey that we're called to undertake, and it is a blessing that our journeys have all intersected at this point to be with each other, for each other during this Lent. And as we come together to fast through the Great Lent, we have an obligation to remember the suffering of the Palestinian people, because they don't have what you and I have. They don't have a state. The Palestinian people have had to undergo something virtually no one has had to go through, and that is being shrunk from a majority into a minority. We got shrunk into a demographic minority, and something like this hasn't happened to anyone else in the way that it has happened to us. As a young Palestinian Christian living in Australia, growing up here, going to school, I faced many challenges in regards to my identity. Many of my friends for years just assumed that I was Muslim, until a few awkward conversations about whether or not I was allowed to drink a beer came up between us. And I had to explain to them that, oh, well, I'm not a Muslim, I'm a Christian. And their response to me was, oh, well, I didn't realize there were Palestinian Christians. When did your family convert? To which I would respond, 2,000 years ago, buddy. That's when we came to follow the Messiah. And this Israel-Palestine conflict in the mainstream media was sold to the Australian public as a conflict between Judaism and Islam, which is frustrating to say the least, because that's the least is what it's actually about. You know, I often found myself explaining to friends and anyone that had an interest in my ethnicity that Palestinian Christians exist too. And the more conversations I had, the more I started to realize how unique my identity actually is. The more I learned about our history, the more I started to value the traditions and the culture that had been passed down to me from generation to generation, all the way back from the time of Jesus. And the more I understood this, the more I valued my faith. It is something that I don't take for granted, and it's something that I want to share with fellow Palestinian Christians of my generation, because I think one of the things that we reflect on is Lent is the amount of spiritual apathy that exists in today's society, especially within my generation and the generations that are beyond mine. And with this spiritual apathy, there is a lack of concern about what is happening outside our social sphere. You know, places like Nazareth and Bethlehem weren't just the backdrop of the grand story of the Bible. They were literally the places that my grandparents lived. So to me, the connection that I have with all Palestinians and to the land is something that is very important. And I believe that as a Christian that comes from such a background, it is a duty almost to provide continuity to our culture and to our faith. It is a great inheritance, I believe, that we have been given, being descendants of the first Christians. And coming to learn more about my faith and going to church and engaging with different groups, it provides a sense of peace, and also a wholesome feeling that we're not just connected through our ethnicity, but we're connected to other Christians through our faith as well. So in saying that, the more that I come to appreciate the culture and traditions, the more my faith strengthens to me. And it's something that I've been reflecting more so upon during the Lenten season. The Lent season also encourages us to be charitable and give to those that have that do not have the same things that we do, that are less fortunate. And I believe that is very true in the case of giving back to the land and helping the people that are on the land find their way. It's quite a blessing to be a Palestinian Christian, to have this unique identity. So, and it's very good that we've come together to form this organization that we have, and to connect with other organizations that share the same goals and want to spread the same awareness. We're not just, we have a unique, so this is quite a unique topic. We are a unique people with a unique history, and we face a unique problem. And the problem that we face didn't just occur in the past and sorted itself out. It is ongoing today. And therefore, I believe as Palestinian Christians, we believe in peace, and we have an obligation to talk this issue up, to let everyone know what our story is, and what our suffering is. Palestinian Christians, in the eyes of many other people from different Christian communities, they believe that we're discriminated against by Palestinian Muslims, which isn't the case at all. The reason why our numbers have dropped significantly is because of the pressures that Zionism has enacted onto us. The net result of the impact that the implementation of Zionism has had to over 490 Palestinian villages is not just something which has happened to Palestinian Christians, but to Palestinian Muslims as well. And I think it's very, very important to shed light on the root cause of why that has happened. And the root cause of why that has happened is the necessity to create a Jewish demographic majority in order to create a Jewish state. You cannot have a democratic state where everybody gets a vote, where you're less than 51% of the population. And so in the time at the Balfour Declaration, and even at the beginning of Zionism, the population ratios between Jews and non-Jews was 8% Jewish and 92% non-Jewish. And therefore, the early Zionists knew that they had to reverse these ratios in order to establish a Jewish state. And everything else, from the checkpoints to the population transfers to the destruction of villages, is a micro symptom of the root cause. And that is the point that we need to make whenever this conflict is discussed, because there is no argument against that. No Jewish person that's a Zionist could argue against that point, because it's just a matter of fact. You cannot have a Jewish state without a Jewish demographic majority. So I believe as Christians, we must connect with our communities. Like myself, as a Melkite Catholic, I've been attending groups from my Roman Catholic counterparts, going to their services, engaging with their youth groups and sharing the Palestinian stories, because I'm in a unique position to engage with them and tell them our story. And I believe Palestinian Christians from all denominations, I encourage them to do the same within their respective communities. So to sum this up, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the only conflict where the non-existent country has been demanded to recognize the right of the existing country to exist. It's like an alive person asking a dead person to recognize his right to live, and most people are clueless on that fact. The thing that we need to be asking people that are Zionists, openly Zionist, is, was it reasonable to expect a non-Jewish demographic majority to accept to be shrunk into a minority and subjugated as a minority as a result of trying to create their state? Was it reasonable? And no conscious person would be able to tell you that it was. So during this Lenten season, I'd like to reflect, I'd encourage you all to reflect on the injustice that has happened in the past, which is still ongoing today. And I encourage you to reach out to our broader Christian family, whether it's attending different parishes, different youth groups, connecting with people and explaining to them what the situation is in the Holy Land. So thank you very much for your time and attention. It is most appreciated.
Sorry, I just muted myself instead of unmuting. Thank you, Jason. Shakur. And Jason has actually given us an extra gift because he's finished a bit quicker than we had scheduled, which is not saying come back and keep going. It just means we will have a little bit more time than we thought we were going to have for questions. And we're about to move into the question and conversation now. So I've just put a post into the chat area to say if people have questions and other discussion points that are forming, might be good just to enter them in there straight away, because we probably won't get through them all, but at least this way other people will have a chance to glimpse some of the insights and questions and reflections that are forming in our minds as we listen. And then I may actually pick some of those out from time to time to put them to Jason for some reaction, or to Susan, as the case may be. But generally speaking, if you're wanting to ask a question or make an observation, please use the reaction button on the bottom of the screen to raise your hand, and that will have the effect of bringing you to the top of the list of the little windows across the top of my screen and make it easier for me to see who's wanting to speak next. So no one's jumped in yet. So let me start with a question that's been on my mind while I was listening to Jason, and perhaps particularly in the light of the conversation we heard earlier from Faten. And that's to do with the sense of diaspora identity. And of course, even the word diaspora is it's a Greek term, but it's a Jewish category, which they've had more than 2,000 years practicing what diaspora means between Babylon and Egypt and various other places. Faten talked about the significance of going back to Palestine and to a village. Now, in your case, Jason, you can't go back to Al Damoun because it was one of the villages which was obliterated and depopulated, as they say, in 1948 as part of the Nakba. So I'm wondering, as a Palestinian Australian and a person of Christian faith, what's your sense of identity given that your village has been disappeared, as it were?
Yes. So look, I will always I am and I always will be a Palestinian Christian. I just happen to be lucky enough to hold both an American and an Australian passport. As I was born in New York City, and my parents decided to move to Australia when I was 3 months old, and I was raised here. I don't take any of the rights and privileges that I do have in Australia for granted as a result, especially knowing what I know about Palestinian Christians. In regards to the town of Al-Damoun, it's a constant reminder that that is the place that I'm indigenous to. I'm not indigenous to Australia. I'm not indigenous to America. I'm from the town that bears my surname. And the fact that I can't return to that town, but an atheist born to Jewish parents that doesn't speak a word of Hebrew, that doesn't practice Judaism, has the right to go into that town and build a home and make a life for themselves. I find that very, very awkward when I'm sitting with Jewish friends here in Perth. Despite our similarities, we have very similar cultures. We're warm and hospitable, loyal to our friends, brutally honest. But so long as that remains the case, there will always be that sense of awkwardness. But being removed from the land doesn't remove me from the connection that I have with the town that bears my surname.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for sharing that, Jason, because that's a very intimate part of your diaspora experience. And I particularly appreciate the fact that either your parents or yourself have chosen to preserve the name of your village in your family name, Damouni. So Mabruk and every blessing. Do other people have observations or questions they'd like to raise? I don't see any golden hands poking up on the screen just yet.
Oh, I do see a question from Helen. Are people and leaders within your Melkite community receptive to your truth telling about Palestine? The question, I'm glad to say, the answer I'm glad to say is yes. The other week we held a screening for the movie The Stones Cry Out at the center next to our Melkite church. And our parish priest gave a welcome to the attendees that came. They are very encouraging that of the activism that I'm doing, especially because it's rooted in truth telling and finding peace and finding a solution and engaging in activism for all the right reasons. It's very much aligned to the principles of our faith.
Yeah. And many of the Christians being displaced, whose displacement is recorded in that film, are of course from places like Ikrit and Baram, which were very much Melkite communities.
Yes.
So, it's been my privilege to worship in both those places.
One of the featured guests on that documentary screening is our Bishop Elias Shakur, who goes into his story and his journey, not just his, but also the journey of his parents having to move from place to place, and he's a feature in that documentary.
Yeah. There's a group of young Palestinians from the Ikrit community who have actually moved back onto the land of Ikrit and are living in the community. Well, it's a room attached to the back of the church, and they've formed a little sort of colony of Palestinians reclaiming Ikrit, which is, it's kind of a sequel to that film. I haven't been in touch with them for a couple of years, but I must reach out and see what's happening with that community. The priest who's from that community, Sabuna Suhail, who is the priest for the Melkite community in Turan and also in Nazareth. But he's from Ikrit, was born there, baptized there, and of course says goes back there on the first Saturday of the month. The whole community gathers back at Ikrit so they can pray together, because the Israelis, for some reason, didn't bomb the church. They destroyed everything else in the village, but not the church and not the cemetery. So you can be baptized there and you can be buried there, but you can't live there in between times. So they have their own internal diaspora experience. The town is, someone's asked how you spell it. It's Ikrit, and I would spell it Iqrit. And if you search for ikrit.org, Ikrit community, they tell the story of their own community. This is a town which actually took the Israeli government to court and won to be allowed to return to their village, but have never been allowed to return, even though they won their case in the High Court or Supreme Court. So it's a fascinating glimpse of one experience of diaspora and displacement. So Ikrit, I-Q-R-I-T. Other questions about the Palestinian identity and perspective from Australia, particularly for Jason, perhaps also for Susan, or I'm sure Margot would be delighted to be put on the spot and grilled.
Yeah, I would like to talk about being in the diaspora. It took me a long time. I've been in Australia for the past 33 years, I think now so far. And when I left Palestine, I was only 17. So you would think that, by the time I'm 53 years old, I would, move on, as they say, move on. But I feel, even though I've lived in Australia much, much more than lived in Palestine, I feel more home for me is Ramallah. I feel, even though I listen to Australian news, it took me a long time not to listen to when I first started, when I first came to Australia. But I listen to Palestine news a lot, and I read lots of information, and I have not stopped reading or listening. And I think it's because I think whether you're Jewish, whether you're Jewish, Palestinian Christian or Muslim, you do have that connection to the land. It's something inexplicable. You can't explain it to people, and you have to feel it. And I understand, from my perspective, I do understand why the Jews 2,000 years later still want to come back. Because 33 years later, Susan still wants to go back. I don't know whether it's 3,300 years later, Susan's descendants want to go back, but it does feel like that from my how I feel about it. And I think it's probably because I think it's the spiritual connection to the land, and the stories of the Bible, whether you're Muslim, Christian, or Jew, to be honest. So you are connected, and it is part of our faith for the three faiths, not only one, with that connection to the land, because you read the Bible and there's Bethlehem and Hebron or Al-Khalil and Nazareth and Jerusalem, and these places are real. And there's a story of where Isaac walked, or Abraham walked, or Jesus walked, and and all the prophets walked, and you just feel that's I think where the connection is, and it's so alluring, and you don't know how to get it out of you. So for us Palestinian, especially Palestinian Christians, we feel it's true what Abuna Elias Shakur says, that it's not we belong to the land, not that the land belongs to us, it's that we belong to the land. It's something, I think, a spiritual experience that you would have, or anybody would have, if they live there or their ancestors are from there. So I think the solution for all the three communities, or the three faiths, and there are other ethnic groups in Palestine as well, like the Druze and the Samaritans. It's not only Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Everyone who's there, does have the right to exist and coexist with people around them. So, you know, our vision is for a place where all communities are living in peace and make the place really holy and make it belong to the Holy Land. So the diaspora is always, the diaspora is heartbreaking. Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions or insights?
There's another one from Helen. How do you respond to Jewish dialogue partners who defend Zionism? Taking up Susan's comment about the land, can this be distinguished from the Jewish state?
State.
Just a typo. Yeah. Look, I always try to listen to what they have to say first to gauge an understanding on how much they actually know about Zionism itself before I respond to them. You'll find that a lot of Zionists who have grown up in Zionist communities, the only thing that they know about Palestinians comes from other Zionists and other Zionist sources. So trying to engage with them, it can be difficult at times when they don't understand what happens, and even more difficult when they do understand what has happened, and they still want to identify as Zionists. For them, for the most part, I would say it doesn't go beyond, like for them, they think that Zionism is simply the movement for self-determination. And I try to explain to them, it's not so much how you define it in theory, but what it means, the impact that it has for the existing local non-Jewish inhabitants of the land. And trying to frame it like that to begin with sort of gives them an understanding. Some of them quite know that they cannot have their state without a Jewish demographic majority. I don't know what the ratio is between the two, because it's very 50-50 when I have engaged with them. Some of them know what it means, in terms of the actual impact that it has when you take it to its logical permutations. Some of them don't even understand the demographic issue that's involved within Zionism and what it means. They have never heard of authors like Rabbi Chaim Simons, who is an ardent Zionist himself, that has documented the proposals to transfer non-Jews from Palestine since 1895. They think that our displacement was a result of a war that we started. They have no idea that there have been plans since before World War II, since the late 19th century, to create a Jewish demographic majority, which means not only bringing in Jews into the land from around the world, but it necessitates depopulating over 490 Palestinian non-Jewish towns and villages. Sometimes that is enough to start them questioning Zionism, questioning its morality. Sometimes they know full well what it means, but they have grown up with a mindset that without a Jewish state, anti-Semitism would continue to persist. They believe that having a Jewish state is the only thing that is going to protect them from being annihilated. And they are more than happy to support such a thing, even though it is at our expense. So the best thing to do is to have a frank conversation with them about our side of the story, many of which they have never heard in their entire upbringing. And sometimes it can be constructive, sometimes it can leave you frustrated. So I hope that's a satisfactory answer to that question.
I always, like, for anyone who wants to defend Zionism, I am sure lots of people think that Zionism has brought a lot of good things especially for the Jewish people. considering the history of 2,000 years of persecution. If I were Jewish, I would think that's a good thing. But one of the things I've been doing the past 30 years is educate people, including Jewish friends, about the consequence of the ideology that has impacted, let's say, my family, and the thousands, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian families, and share with them that, you know, as a result of Zionism and the ideology of, you know, like just, you know, with the blinkers on, it has dispossessed both my maternal and paternal grandparents. Everyone I know in my family, uncles, cousins, aunties, everyone lost their home. Everyone lost their businesses, their jobs, their orange groves. My grandparents, or my mom's grandparents, lost 2 sesame factories. One was in Jerusalem, the other one was in Ramleh. They lost orange groves in Jaffa. We lost lots of land in Ramleh. And if you, and this is just, you know, a few families that are connected to me and belong to my family tribe. Imagine the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who have lost their homes, lands, livelihoods, and businesses, and multiply all of that and think what the, you know, what did Zionism as a result achieve? It's achieved great stuff for its own people, but it came at the expense of another people. Now, do we want to continue doing that, or do we want something else? Do we want to include people and come to a solution where there is win-win? So I think that's the next conversation for Zionism and for anyone who defends Zionism, especially Christian Zionists, who are actually more Zionist than the Jews. You know, I've met more moderate Jewish Zionists than Christian Zionists in my experience, hence us trying to set up the PCIA to counter that ideology as well. So from my perspective, it's, you know, look at the result it has done. And we want to tell the truth about what happened to our families and to the hundreds of thousands of families. And that's why we have refugees. That's why 70% of Gaza residents come from the towns and villages around Gaza. They are refugees as a result of 1948 and 1967. And we need to keep that conversation in the forefront, because a lot of people forget that that is the source of the conflict for the past 70-40 years and going. So yeah, it's our stories that we want to tell.
I've got one last question we'll try and squeeze in before I hand back to Susan to do a call to action. It's a question from Mark Batterson, and I suspect we'll see how quickly perhaps Jason can respond to it. If you can see the question, Jason, Mark is asking about how realistic is it for younger Palestinians to go back to Palestine at some stage and rebuild their villages, basically the right of return, but in the sense of rebuilding, reclaiming. Any observations on that? I know the official line.
Well, I mean, look, as someone that has already established myself in Australia, I think it's the chances are, look, I always first compare this question to Jewish people. A Jewish state has existed for over the last 70 years, but yet the majority of Jews still live outside of Israel, right? People have their lives in their respective countries, most of them in the United States, and just because a Jewish state exists, it doesn't mean you just uproot yourself and leave. However, if that was given to us as an option, I believe that a significant portion of us would want to take that opportunity and return back to the land that our grandparents were displaced from. Given the likelihood of that is happening, I would say that it is unlikely at this stage, as there seems to be no progress through negotiations between both sides. I think the international community, and it's up to us to pressure and lobby our governments to push for dialogue instead of picking a side, which is what countries tend to do. I think the more that we push for dialogue, the more likely a solution would happen, and then more likely the opportunity for us to reach an agreement to go back there and establish a home that in the village that bears my surname becomes more likely. Unfortunately, at this stage, it's very hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But being Christians, we do believe in miracles. And I do believe that it is something that I don't want to give up hope on. It's something that I will never give up hope on. And it's something that just because it's unlikely doesn't mean that we should stop and do nothing and call it quits. So if the opportunity presented itself to me, depending on my situation, mainly my financial situation, I would love to go back to Al Damoon and rebuild the church with my family that was destroyed there.
Okay, thank you. We will have to leave it there, but again, there's a whole lot of lines of conversation. I'm looking forward to having some of those conversations with you in the months and years to come. I'm going to hand over to Susan now to express thanks to both Jason and Faten, and also just to share some other information with us.
Thank you, Jason, for this well-prepared speech, and thank you to Faten for sharing your personal experience of what it's like to be a Palestinian Christian living in Australia. If you want to know more about Palestinian Christians in Australia or PCIA, please visit our website. We have curated a library of talks, books, articles, and documentaries on Palestine and the Palestinian Christians. And before I hand over to Helen to conclude this meeting, let me remind you that the Palm Sunday evening will be on Saturday, the 9th of April. Be sure to register. We're looking forward to seeing you online next week.
Apologies. We pray for God's blessing on Palestinian Australians in their many and varied situations, and on all the people of the Holy Land, that a path to peace may be found. And may the Spirit of God guide and strengthen us all. In Jesus' name, Amen. Good evening, everyone.